It was one of those warm California afternoons when the air feels heavy, as if the whole world is pausing to take a breath. I had been in the garden since morning, trimming roses, pulling weeds, and trying to keep the stubborn tomato plants alive through the late summer heat. My knees ached more than they used to, my back stiff from bending, but the work gave me comfort. The garden was Robert's pride once, and though he's been gone nearly a decade, I still feel closest to him out here. That's when I heard a familiar voice call from the gate. "Aunt Meg." I looked up, surprised. There he was, Daniel, my step-nephew. He wasn't a boy anymore, though in my memory I still see him running through family cookouts with grass stains on his jeans. Now he was 28, broad-shouldered, with dark hair falling across his forehead. He had moved 2 towns over a few years ago, busy with his job and his own life. We didn't see each other often. I wiped the sweat from my brow with the back of my glove. "Well, look who it is," I said, trying to mask my surprise. "What brings you here?" He leaned against the gate, carrying a small bag slung over his shoulder. "Thought I'd check in, and maybe give you a hand out here. Looks like you've been working hard." Something in his smile was familiar, yet different, softer, more careful. I opened the gate and let him in, my heart unexpectedly lighter. We worked side by side for the better part of an hour. He pulled weeds, stronger hands making light of the work that usually left me sore for days. We didn't talk much at first, only exchanged small comments about the soil, the weather, the stubborn roses. But every so often I caught him glancing at me, his eyes thoughtful in a way that made my chest tighten. When the sun dipped lower, I led him inside. The kitchen smelled faintly of lavender from the sachets I kept in the drawers. I poured us glasses of sweet tea, and he sat in Robert's old chair by the window, the one that still creaked just the same. Watching him sink into it stirred something deep inside me, a strange blend of comfort and unease. Before I continue, dear friends, I want to pause and say this. If you enjoy these heartfelt true stories, tales of love, loss, and the unexpected moments life places in our path, please take a second to subscribe to this channel. Your support means these stories can keep being told, stories that remind us none of us are ever truly alone. As evening settled in, Daniel offered to stay and help with dinner. I protested at first out of habit, but truthfully I was glad for the company. The house has felt too quiet for too long. He chopped vegetables while I seasoned the chicken, our movements falling into an easy rhythm. Over dinner he asked about Robert, about the family, about the years that had slipped by too quickly. His voice carried genuine warmth, and for the first time in a long while I felt seen, not just as someone's grandmother or widow but as myself. After the dishes were cleared, I suggested he head home before it grew too late. But Daniel hesitated. "Actually," he said softly, "I was wondering if I might stay the night. It's a long drive back and I'd like to spend a little more time here. With you." The words lingered in the quiet kitchen and something in the air shifted. My heart gave a small, startled flutter. I nodded slowly. Of course. The guest room is always ready. But as I led him down the hall, I couldn't help but wonder why my hands trembled just slightly on the doorknob, and why the thought of him staying made the night ahead feel so very different. The guest room had been ready for years, though rarely used. Fresh sheets folded neatly, a quilt draped across the bed, the faint scent of lavender lingering from the sachets tucked in the dresser. As I opened the door for Daniel, I felt a wave of memory. How many times had I walked this hall alone, passing by these quiet rooms without stopping? Now with him here, the house felt awake. "Thank you," he said quietly, stepping past me into the room. His back dropped onto the chair by the window. "It feels good here. Like nothing's changed." I smiled faintly, though my chest tightened. "Some of us like things just the way they are," I replied. For a moment he lingered in the doorway, his gaze on me longer than expected. Something unspoken flickered in his eyes. Then he nodded, offering a soft goodnight before closing the door. I should have gone straight to bed, but my body resisted. I found myself pacing the kitchen, wiping already clean counters, pouring water I didn't drink. The house was quiet, yet it wasn't the same kind of quiet it had been for years. This quiet felt expectant. Finally, I settled into Robert's chair, the one Daniel had sat in earlier. The cushion was still warm from his presence, and I pressed my palm against it as if trying to hold on to something fleeting. My thoughts circled restlessly. Why had he come tonight after all this time? Why the sudden visit, the long hours in the garden, the easy laughter over dinner? And why, my pulse quickened at the thought, why had he chosen to stay the night? I don't know how long I sat there, but eventually I heard footsteps. Slow, hesitant ones moving down the hallway. Then Daniel appeared in the doorway, hair tousled, wearing just a t-shirt and pajama pants. "Can't sleep?" I asked softly, my voice betraying more than I wanted. He shook his head, a faint smile touching his lips. "Guess I'm not used to the quiet out here. The city never stops making noise." He hesitated, then added, "Thought maybe I'd find you awake." I gestured to the chair across from me, the one I usually avoided because it felt too empty. "Sit," I said. And so he did. We sat together in the dim glow of the lamp, steam rising from the mugs of tea I poured to fill the silence. At first we spoke of safe things. The garden, his job, the endless traffic in his part of town. But as the minutes passed, the conversation slowed. His eyes lingered longer, his voice softened, and the pauses between words seemed to stretch. At one point his gaze drifted to the photograph on the mantel. Robert and me, younger, sunlit, laughing at some picnic long ago. "You looked happy," he said quietly. I swallowed, feeling the weight of the memory. I was. We had our struggles, but Robert, he loved me in a way that made me certain of myself. Daniel's expression softened, but there was something else behind his eyes. Something almost aching. "I hope I can find something like that someday," he murmured. Then, almost too softly to hear, he added, "Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel at home anywhere." His words struck me. I knew that feeling too well. The drifting, the searching, the quiet loneliness that lingers even in a crowded room. I reached across the table, resting my hand lightly over his. "You'll find it," I whispered. "Sometimes it comes where you least expect." He didn't pull away. His hand stayed warm beneath mine, steady, and in the silence that followed, the air between us seemed to shift again. Closer, heavier, alive. Eventually the clock chimed midnight. I drew back my hand slowly, reluctantly, and stood. "We should get some rest," I said, though my voice trembled. Daniel rose too, his gaze never leaving mine. For a moment I thought he might say something more, something that would break the fragile line we walked. But instead he only nodded. "Good night," he said softly. As he disappeared down the hallway, I felt the house exhale around me. Yet as I climbed the stairs to my own room, I knew sleep would not come easily. Because the truth was undeniable now. Something had changed the moment he decided to stay. And nothing would be quite the same again. The house was never truly silent after midnight. Old pipes sighed, the wood groaned against the night air, and the clock in the hallway ticked with a rhythm that sometimes felt louder than my own breath. But that night the sound seemed sharper, heavier, because my mind refused to rest. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the quilt pulled high to my chest, though warmth was not what I lacked. My heart had carried Daniel's words with me, the way he had spoken of belonging, of not knowing where he fit. And the weight of his hand beneath mine still burned in my palm, though hours had passed since. It should have been nothing. Just a gesture of comfort, a grandmotherly kindness. But that wasn't what it felt like. And that's why sleep would not come. At some point I rose, wrapping my robe around my shoulders. The hall was dim, moonlight spilling through the lace curtains, painting faint shadows across the floor. I told myself I was only getting water. Only keeping busy until rest finally came. But as I passed the guest room I slowed. The door was closed, but a thin line of light glowed beneath it. He wasn't asleep. My hand hovered over the wood, uncertain. Then, as if pulled by something stronger than reason, I knocked gently. The door creaked open after a moment. Daniel stood there, hair mussed, shirt wrinkled, his eyes shadowed from wakefulness. He looked surprised at first, then almost relieved. "You couldn't sleep either?" I asked softly. He shook his head, stepping back to let me in. "Too many thoughts." The room was small but warm, the lamp by the bed casting a golden glow. I perched on the edge of the chair by the window while he sat on the bed, elbows on his knees. For a while we said nothing. The silence was thick but not empty. It carried weight, questions neither of us dared speak. Finally, Daniel broke it. "Do you ever feel," he began slowly, "like you've lived a whole life but part of you still waits for something more?" The question pierced me. At 76, I had thought my waiting was long over. That the chapters of love were written, bound, and placed neatly on the shelf of memory. And yet, here I was, pulse quickening at words I could not name aloud. "Yes," I whispered. "More times than I care to admit." He looked at me then, his eyes steady, searching. Not with the playful glances of a boy, but with the gaze of a man carrying something heavier. "When I'm here," he said softly, "I don't feel lost. Not the way I usually do." The air seemed to fold around us then, pulling us closer though neither of us moved. My throat tightened, my hands fidgeting with the tie of my robe. "This place," I said quickly, almost too quickly, "it holds a lot of memories. Maybe that's what you're feeling." Daniel shook his head. "No, it's not the house. It's you." The words landed between us, dangerous and undeniable. I should have stopped him, should have reminded him of lines we could never cross. But the truth was, I felt it too. The clock struck 1, its chime muffled by distance but sharp enough to break the moment. I rose abruptly, smoothing the robe around me. "We should try again for sleep," I said, though my voice trembled. "Morning will come before we know it." He nodded, but his eyes lingered on mine, heavy with everything unsaid. "Good night," he murmured. As I stepped back into the hall, the silence of the house felt different again. Not empty, not lonely, but alive, humming with a question I could no longer ignore. Back in my own bed, I lay restless, staring at the faint outline of the dresser in the dark. The night stretched on endlessly, and I knew sleep would not come. Not while his words echoed inside me. "It's not the house. It's you." And though I tried to bury it, the truth rose, insistent. A line had already been crossed, not in action but in thought. And thought once born is not easily undone. Morning light always had a way of softening things, but that day it seemed too bright, too insistent, spilling across the curtains like it wanted to expose every thought I had tried to bury the night before. I moved through the kitchen slowly, setting the kettle on the stove, laying out bread for toast, trying to remind myself that it was just another morning. That I was just an old woman in her house and Daniel was just family visiting for a night. But nothing felt ordinary. My hands trembled slightly as I buttered the toast, and I caught myself listening, waiting for the sound of his steps on the stairs. When it came, my chest tightened. "Good morning," Daniel said softly, entering the kitchen. His hair was damp, his shirt fresh, but his eyes carried the same shadows as mine. He hadn't slept either. "Good morning," I replied, forcing brightness into my voice. "Tea's almost ready." He smiled faintly, sliding into Robert's old chair at the table. And just like that, the memory of the night before rushed back. The warmth of his hand under mine, the words he had spoken. "It's not the house." I placed his cup in front of him, careful not to let our fingers touch. But even that small care only made the silence heavier. We ate in quiet, the only sounds the clink of forks and the hum of the kettle. I tried to speak of safe things, the weather, the garden, errands I had been meaning to run, but every word fell flat. Finally, Daniel broke the silence. "Thank you for letting me stay last night. I didn't mean to intrude." "You weren't intruding," I said quickly, almost too quickly. "It was nice, having someone here." His eyes softened at that, and for a moment I felt exposed. After breakfast, we returned to the garden. The sun was already warm, the earth soft beneath our feet. Daniel worked beside me, digging, trimming, lifting what my arms could no longer manage. But though our hands were busy, our thoughts were not. Every glance, every brush of his shoulder near mine felt like it carried more meaning than it should. At one point, I wiped my brow and caught him watching me, not with idle curiosity, but with a kind of quiet intensity that made me catch my breath. He looked away quickly, pretending to busy himself with the roses. But I had seen it, and I knew he had seen me see it. By noon, the air grew heavy with heat and we retreated back inside. I poured lemonade into tall glasses, the condensation running down my fingers. Daniel stood at the counter beside me, too close, his arm brushing mine as he reached for the pitcher. "Sorry," he murmured, but he didn't move away. I forced a small laugh, though my heart was racing. The kitchen's not that big. It happens. But inside I knew better. The space between us wasn't shrinking by accident. Later, as he packed a small bag to run into town, I found myself alone in the living room, staring at Robert's photograph on the mantel. His steady smile, his familiar eyes, reminders of a love I had once believed would be enough for a lifetime. And yet here I was, 76, trembling like a girl under the weight of glances and words that threatened to undo me. What did that say about me? About loyalty, about boundaries, about the woman I thought I was? But another voice whispered beneath the shame. What if this is simply what it means to still be alive? To feel seen again after so long of being invisible? When Daniel returned later that afternoon, he brought groceries and a quiet smile. He set the bags down on the counter and looked at me with a softness that said more than words could. And in that moment I realized something had shifted irreversibly. It didn't matter what I told myself or how carefully I tried to walk the line. We had already stepped past it, not with our bodies, not yet, but with our hearts. And the question that lingered unspoken between us was no longer if, it was when. That afternoon, the house felt heavier than usual, as if the walls themselves carried the weight of what neither of us dared to speak. I tried to busy myself with small things, folding towels, watering the potted plants, straightening the magazines on the coffee table. But no matter what I did, I was listening for his footsteps again. When they came, steady and unhurried, I froze. Daniel appeared in the doorway, carrying a stack of firewood even though the day was warm. "Thought you might want it stocked up," he said, shrugging. "Nights get cool out here." He placed the logs carefully by the hearth, then stood, brushing dust from his hands. I watched him, broad shoulders, strong hands, the easy confidence of someone who had grown into himself. And suddenly I wasn't looking at a boy anymore. "Would you like some tea?" I asked, my voice quieter than I intended. He nodded and we moved into the kitchen together. Again the space felt too small, our movements brushing against each other as if the house itself wanted to press us closer. I set the kettle on, my hands fumbling slightly. He leaned against the counter watching me, but not in a casual way. His eyes lingered, steady, searching, as if he was waiting for me to acknowledge something I had been trying to ignore. "You don't have to do everything alone, you know," he said finally. "You've been carrying so much by yourself for years." I swallowed hard, blinking against the sudden sting in my eyes. "I've had to," I whispered. "That's what happens when you lose the person who was always there." He didn't speak right away. Then softly, "Maybe you don't have to anymore." The kettle whistled sharply, breaking the moment. I poured the water, hands trembling just enough for him to notice. He reached out, steadying the cup before it spilled. Our fingers touched, and this time neither of us moved away. A silence filled the kitchen, thicker than any before. His hand lingered over mine, warm, firm, too steady to be an accident. My breath caught, and I forced myself to pull back, carrying the cups to the table as if nothing had happened. But everything had. We sat across from each other, sipping tea in the kind of silence that wasn't empty at all. It was alive, charged, restless. He spoke of small things, work in town, a friend he hadn't seen in years. But his voice felt like it was circling something larger, something waiting between us. At one point, his eyes drifted to the mantel, to Robert's photograph. He stared at it a long time before speaking again. "He must have loved you a lot," Daniel said quietly. "He did," I answered, my throat tightening. "And I loved him. I still do." Daniel nodded slowly, then turned back to me. His gaze was steady, unflinching. "But you're still here. You're still alive." The words landed heavy in my chest. Because beneath them was a question neither of us dared put into full voice. And what now? Evening came quickly. The light slanted low across the floor, painting the room in gold. I moved about the kitchen, preparing a simple dinner. Roast chicken, potatoes, green beans from a can. Daniel helped without being asked, chopping vegetables, rinsing dishes, his presence filling the space with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. We ate quietly but not uncomfortably. Every glance, every smile carried more than it should. It felt less like a meal and more like a rehearsal for something neither of us knew how to name. Afterward, we cleaned together, our movements falling into an easy rhythm. At one point, our hands brushed over the same dish. We froze, eyes meeting. For a breath, neither of us moved. Then he let go first, chuckling softly, trying to ease the tension. But the moment lingered long after the dish was set aside. Later, as the house grew quiet, we stepped out onto the porch. The air was cooler, carrying the scent of damp earth and honeysuckle. The swing creaked gently as we sat side by side. Our arms brushed, but this time neither of us shifted away. The stars blinked to life above us, one by one. Daniel leaned back, exhaling slowly. "It feels different here," he said. "Like time slows down." I nodded, my hands folded tightly in my lap. "That's what I always loved about this place. Keeps things still." He turned to me then, his gaze steady, searching. "Maybe that's why I came," he said softly. "Because I needed to feel still again. With you." The silence that followed was thick, electric. I felt my heart beating against my ribs, too loud, too alive. I wanted to say something, anything, but the words wouldn't come. And so we sat there on the edge of something neither of us could name as the night deepened around us. The second night crept in quieter than the first, yet it felt heavier somehow, like the house itself had begun to notice. I laid out fresh sheets in the guest room, smoothing the quilt with deliberate hands. I told myself this was routine, just good manners. He was family after all. But deep inside I knew it wasn't only about courtesy. I lingered too long at the doorway, listening to the faint sound of his footsteps moving across the hall. When Daniel appeared, he smiled gently. "You didn't have to do that, Meg." "I wanted to," I replied, my voice soft. "Everyone deserves a clean bed." He hesitated in the doorway, his hand brushing the frame. For a moment it seemed he might say something else. But instead he just nodded. "Thank you." Later I sat in the living room with a book open in my lap. But the words blurred. The clock ticked steadily on the mantel, the air carrying that faint lavender scent I always tucked into the drawers. It should have been comforting. Instead I felt restless, aware of the closed door down the hallway. When Daniel finally joined me I nearly jumped. He had changed into a plain t-shirt and loose pants, his hair still damp from a shower. He looked younger that way, yet also more like a man than I'd ever let myself admit. "Couldn't sleep?" I asked, setting the book aside. He shook his head and sat down across from me. "Too many thoughts." I nodded. "I know the feeling." For a while we spoke of safe things again. His job in the city, the noise of traffic, how he sometimes wished he had grown up in the quiet of the country. But each pause stretched too long, each silence held too much. Then his eyes drifted to Robert's armchair, the one he had sat in the night before. "I keep thinking about him," Daniel said softly. "What he must have meant to you. What it was like to share so many years." I swallowed, my gaze fixed on the photograph above the fireplace. It was everything. He made me feel seen, safe, like I was never alone. Daniel leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. His voice dropped lower. "That's how I feel here. With you." The air shifted then, sharp and undeniable. My breath caught. For a moment I wanted to tell him to stop, to take his words back before they carved too deep. But I didn't. Instead I whispered, "Daniel," not as a warning but as a plea I didn't fully understand myself. He looked at me steadily, his eyes open, unguarded. "I don't mean to confuse things," he said. I can't pretend it doesn't feel real. Not anymore." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was thick, alive, humming between us like something waiting to be named. Finally I rose, carrying the empty teacups into the kitchen. My hands trembled as I rinsed them under the faucet. I needed space, needed the cool water to ground me. But when I turned he was standing in the doorway watching. "Meg," he said quietly. Just my name, but it held everything he wasn't saying. I shook my head slightly. "We shouldn't." "I know," he interrupted. "But knowing doesn't make it go away." The words sank into me, heavy and certain. He wasn't asking, wasn't pressing. He was simply telling the truth. And part of me hated how much I needed to hear it. That night the house was too quiet. I lay awake in my bed, the moonlight spilling faint silver patterns across the floor. Every creak of the wood, every sigh of the wind felt louder in the silence. And then I heard it. Soft steps down the hall. They paused outside my door. For a long moment nothing moved. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat louder than the last. But the door never opened. After a while the steps retreated, fading back toward the guest room. I closed my eyes, trembling, not from fear but from everything I hadn't allowed myself to feel in years. And as sleep finally stole over me, one thought lingered, pressing deep into my chest. We are standing at the edge of something neither of us can name. And I don't know how long we can keep from stepping over it. The next morning dawned softer than the last, but my heart was still restless. I moved through the kitchen with practiced motions, measuring coffee, laying bread on the table, setting out 2 cups instead of 1. It was becoming a rhythm I hadn't expected, as though Daniel's presence had quietly rewoven itself into the fabric of my days. When he entered the room, hair still tousled from sleep, shirt loose and wrinkled, I felt that familiar shift in the air again. He murmured morning, with a voice rough from sleep, and it stirred something deep in me I couldn't name. We ate in near silence, yet it wasn't empty. It was charged, full of unspoken words. He lingered at the table even after finishing his toast, his gaze drifting toward me and away again like waves brushing the shore. Finally he spoke. I was thinking, maybe I could stay a little longer. Help you finish some things around here. My chest tightened. I wanted to say yes, to let the word slip free as easily as breath. But instead I hesitated. Don't you have work? A life to get back to? He looked at me then, steady, unflinching. Maybe this feels more like life than anything else right now. The day stretched on quietly. We worked side by side in the garden, pulling weeds, trimming back rose bushes that had grown wild. The sun was warm, the air sweet with the scent of cut grass. Yet every time his arm brushed mine, every time his voice softened when he spoke to me, I felt the ground beneath me shift just a little more. At one point, as I bent to gather cut branches, I lost my balance slightly. Daniel was there in an instant, his hand firm on my arm, steadying me. You okay? He asked, his face so close I could see the flecks of green in his eyes. Yes, I whispered, though my voice caught. His hand lingered longer than it needed to, and neither of us moved. The air between us thickened, heavy, alive. And then, as if realizing the weight of the moment, he let go abruptly, clearing his throat. Maybe we should take a break. Inside we shared cold lemonade in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, watching me as I fussed with the glasses, pretending to be busy. Finally, he broke the silence. Meg, do you ever wonder if people would understand? I froze, my hands tightening around the glass. Understand what? He didn't look away. This. Whatever this is. My heart pounded. The question I had been running from was now laid bare on the table between us. I don't know if it's about them, I said softly. I think it's about us. And whether we can live with what it means. The afternoon grew heavy with tension. We moved through the house as if orbiting each other, never straying too far, never colliding fully. Until evening came, and with it a sudden summer storm. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolled low in the distance. The power flickered once, then went out entirely, plunging the house into shadow. Looks like it's just us and the storm, Daniel said, his voice low but steady. I lit a lantern, the golden glow casting long, soft shadows across the living room. The storm outside made the walls feel closer, the silence more intimate. We sat together, the lantern between us, the sound of rain filling the room like a heartbeat. At one point, lightning flashed, illuminating his face in sharp relief. He looked at me then, truly looked, and something in his eyes made my breath catch. It wasn't boyish curiosity. It wasn't even just longing. It was recognition, as though he saw me fully for the first time and wanted me still. Meg, he said softly, my name breaking on his lips. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. The thunder rumbled again, and in the quiet that followed, his hand brushed against mine on the armrest. Slowly, deliberately, his fingers slid to cover mine. I didn't pull away. The storm raged outside, but in that small circle of lantern light, the world felt suspended. Just two people breathing the same heavy air, holding hands in a silence that said more than words ever could. And in that moment, the question was no longer about what was right or wrong or what others would think. It was only about what would happen next. The storm outside refused to let up. Rain hammered the roof, wind bent the old trees in the yard, and thunder rolled like a drumbeat that would not end. Yet inside the house there was only stillness, except for the quiet rhythm of our hands resting together on the armrest. Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around mine, a silent confirmation of everything we had both been circling for days. My pulse quickened. I could feel the warmth of his skin against mine, steady, certain, as though he wasn't afraid of what this meant. I wish I could say I pulled away immediately, that I set the boundary clearly, that I reminded him of who we were to each other. But I didn't. I stayed there, trembling, letting the moment linger longer than I should have. Lightning lit the room again, spilling shadows across his face. He turned toward me, his eyes catching mine, steady and unflinching. For a breath I thought he might speak, but he didn't. He didn't need to. The silence between us carried everything. Finally, I whispered, almost too softly to hear over the storm, "We shouldn't." His jaw tightened, but his voice was calm. "I know." He paused, then added, "But that doesn't mean it isn't real." The honesty in his tone made my chest ache. I wanted to deny it, to push the words back across the space between us. But I couldn't, because it was real. Too real. To break the heaviness, I rose and moved toward the kitchen. I'll make more tea, I said, my voice thin. Daniel followed close behind, carrying the lantern. The small circle of light moved with us, casting the kitchen into gold and shadow. I busied myself with the kettle, though the power was still out. Daniel struck a match and lit an old burner, his movements practiced, quiet. As the water began to heat, I leaned against the counter, my hands gripping the edge to steady myself. He stood opposite me, arms folded, watching. "You don't have to keep pretending, Meg," he said softly. "Not with me." His words cut deep because they were true. Pretending had been my shield for so long. Pretending I was fine, pretending the loneliness didn't matter, pretending I no longer needed to be seen. But Daniel had seen through all of it. The kettle whistled faintly, breaking the tension. I poured the water into 2 cups, my hands shaking slightly. When I handed him his, our fingers brushed again. Another small spark, another reminder that we were already too far down a path that had no easy return. We carried the cups back to the living room, the lantern flickering on the table between us. The storm outside roared, but inside, everything felt quiet. Too quiet. Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring into the lantern flame. His voice was low when he spoke. "I don't want to hurt you. I don't want this to feel wrong. But I also can't sit here and act like none of it matters." I swallowed hard. "It matters," I admitted, my voice trembling. "That's the problem." He looked at me then, his eyes steady, almost pleading. "Or maybe, it's the answer." The words hung in the air, thick and heavy. I wanted to respond, but my throat tightened. Instead, I looked away, my gaze landing on Robert's photograph across the room. His smile, frozen in time, seemed to watch us from the shadows. Guilt pressed against my chest, sharp and unforgiving. Yet right beside it was something else. Something I hadn't felt in years. Aliveness. I turned back to Daniel, and in the golden glow of the lantern, I saw it reflected in his eyes. He wasn't asking for permission to rewrite the past. He was asking if the present could mean something new. The storm eventually softened, the rain easing to a steady patter, the thunder rolling farther into the distance. But the storm inside me had only grown. As we sat there, the lantern between us, I realized we were balanced on the edge of a choice neither of us had spoken aloud. One that could change everything. And for the first time I wasn't sure which frightened me more, stepping over the line or never daring to at all. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. The storm had passed, leaving behind a damp stillness that clung to the walls. Drops of rain slid down the window, glistening in the moonlight. And yet it wasn't the storm that kept me awake. It was Daniel. He sat across from me in the flickering glow of the lantern, his hands folded loosely, his eyes steady on mine. For a long while neither of us spoke. The silence was no longer just silence. It was a question. An invitation. A line waiting to be drawn or crossed. I wanted to breathe steady, to convince myself that I was still the same woman I had always been. Loyal. Certain. Bound by memory and duty. But the truth pressed in like the night air. Loneliness is a kind of hunger. And hunger doesn't ask permission. "Meg," he said finally, my name softer than the wind outside. "Tell me the truth. Do you feel it too?" My chest tightened. I looked down at my hands, folded in my lap, trembling slightly. I could have lied. I could have said no, dismissed everything as foolishness, pretended this was only in his imagination. But when I lifted my eyes back to his, I knew the lie would crumble before it left my lips. "Yes," I whispered. "I feel it." His breath caught just faintly, but enough that I heard it. The admission hung between us like a fragile thread, dangerous, precious, unbreakable. The lantern flickered as though it too was holding its breath. Daniel leaned forward, his voice low, careful. "Then what do we do? What do we do?" The question rattled through me. There was no guidebook, no map for this path we had stumbled onto. The world would never understand. Perhaps even I didn't. But one thing was certain. Ignoring it hadn't made it disappear. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. Instead, I rose slowly, carrying my empty teacup into the kitchen. The air shifted as I walked away, heavy with everything unsaid. I rinsed the cup under cool water, the sound sharp in the quiet. And then I felt it, the presence of him behind me. He hadn't stayed in the living room. He was here, close enough that I could feel the warmth of him at my back. I turned slowly, the dish towel clenched in my hands. His eyes met mine, steady, waiting. For a moment, time stopped. I don't know how long we stood there, caught in that fragile balance. Long enough for me to know that if either of us moved, the world would tilt in a way we could never undo. Finally, I whispered, "We should sleep." Daniel nodded, though his eyes didn't leave mine. "Yeah. Sleep." But as he turned away, heading back toward the hallway, I felt the echo of everything that hadn't been said pressing against my chest. That night I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Every creak of the old house, every whisper of the wind through the trees felt sharper, louder. And when I heard the faint sound of his door closing down the hall, I closed my eyes, my heart aching with both relief and longing. Because the truth was, I didn't know where this would end. All I knew was that something had already begun. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to change everything. That's where I'll leave you tonight, dear listener. Stories like this are rarely neat or simple. They live in the spaces between choices, in the silences we can't quite name. Maybe you've felt something like it yourself. The tension between loyalty and loneliness, between what's expected and what's deeply, quietly real. If this story touched something in you, I'd love for you to stay with us. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, share your own thoughts. These stories don't belong to just one person, they live in all of us. And sometimes when we share them, we realize we're not as alone as we thought. Until next time, thank you for listening.